It was Valentine's Day 2004. In the bustling city of Vadodara, Gujarat, a young woman's dreams were just beginning. A new marriage, a promising career, a future she believed in. But that night everything ended. Inside a modest apartment on the edge of the city, she was found lifeless on the floor, strangled. No forced entry. No cries for help. And no clear answers. Her husband told police it was a burglary gone wrong. He wept at the funeral, swore he was innocent, swore he'd help find the killer. But within days he vanished, leaving behind his wife's family, a trail of forged documents, and a mystery that would stretch across states and decades. For almost 15 years, the man accused of her murder built a new life under another name. He married again. He had children. He passed background checks. He smiled for photographs. And all the while the case file on his first wife gathered dust in a police station locker. Then one phone call changed everything. A slip of the tongue. A routine surveillance trace. And suddenly, a fugitive's second life began to collapse. This is not just a story of a murder. It's a story of betrayal, obsession, and how far someone will go to escape justice. Stay with us to the end because the final twist will leave you stunned. And if you believe the truth should never be buried, subscribe to Unraveling Crimes now. New stories of hidden crimes every week. To understand what happened on that February night, we must first step back into the lives of the people at the center of this tragedy. Meera Rao was just 26. A bright, disciplined bank executive in the city of Vadodara, Gujarat. Raised in a modest apartment near the old textile market, she'd been the pride of her middle-class parents, Ramesh and Lakshmi Rao. Every day she rose before dawn, walked to the bus stop, and rode across town to the branch office where she handled customers' savings with quiet efficiency. She was kind, dutiful, the kind of daughter neighbors pointed to and said, "See? That's how you raise a child." Her parents, Ramesh and Lakshmi, had built their lives on hard work and small dreams. For them, Meera's marriage was the culmination of their hopes. The groom they chose seemed perfect on paper. Amar Dev was a former school coach, tall, soft-spoken, a man with a confident smile. He came from a blended family with roots stretching down to Kerala in southern India. His father, Devraj, had retired from the railways. His mother, Anama, ran a small tailoring shop. His elder brother, Arun, was already settled with a family of his own. To the Raos, Amar looked like stability, respectability, and a future for their only daughter. The newlyweds moved into a modest flat on the edge of Vadodara, in a district called Bhopalpur. It was a city in transition, still dusty and crowded, but with new malls and offices rising on the outskirts. This was 2003, before smartphones, before social media, when paper records ruled and identity cards could be bent, forged, or lost without a trace. It was a time when secrets could last a little longer, and the gaps between states were wide enough for a man to disappear. On the surface, Meera and Amar seemed like a perfect match. Photographs from their wedding showed them smiling, garlands of jasmine draped over their shoulders, family crowded close. But behind the carefully staged pictures and polite conversations at family dinners, currents of tension were already swirling. Currents no one could yet see. Currents that, on Valentine's Day, would pull Meera to her death and set Amar on a path of flight, deception, and a double life that would last for 15 long years. It was supposed to be a night of roses and candlelight. Valentine's Day 2004. The day lovers across Vadodara exchanged gifts, sent text messages on their tiny Nokia phones, and crowded into cafes decorated with paper hearts. In the small flat at Bhopalpur, Meera Rao was getting ready for an evening she hoped would bring her and Amar Dev closer. She had bought him a card and a small silver chain. She had even cooked his favorite dish, a simple Kerala-style fish curry, to remind him of home. Neighbors later recalled hearing soft music playing behind the thin apartment walls. Meera laughing once, a door closing, then silence. It was still daylight when Amar left briefly, or so he claimed, to fetch something from a shop. By the time darkness fell, that silence had deepened into something else entirely. At 8:04 p.m., a frantic call went out from Amar Dev's mobile to Meera's parents. His voice cracked with panic, words tumbling over each other. She's not breathing. Somebody broke in. Help. When police and family arrived, they found Meera lying on the bedroom floor, her sari twisted, the gold chain at her neck snapped. The room looked disturbed. Drawers open, a chair overturned. Yet strangely, the cash and jewelry boxes were untouched. Her wedding bangles are still on her wrists. Her handbag is still full of money. The police noticed bruises on her neck, small crescent marks of fingernails. The postmortem would later call it death by strangulation, not by a stranger's weapon but by hands that knew her. Inside the flat, police dogs sniffed the edges of the bed, the cupboards and the kitchen. They circled back over and over, to one spot near the bed where Amar had been kneeling. They would not leave the room. Yet Amar told anyone who would listen that it was a burglary gone wrong. He stood outside the building, clutching his head, repeating, "It's a terrible shock. A terrible shock." He sobbed at the funeral, accepting condolences, but refused to answer deeper questions from Meera's relatives. And within days, before the police could finish questioning him, Amar Dev, grieving husband, star witness, simply disappeared. He vanished like a shadow at dusk. And with his disappearance, the case began to shift from a tragic mystery to a manhunt that would span 15 years and 3 states. In the hours after Meera's death, Varada's crime branch moved quickly. A team photographed every inch of the Bhopalpur flat. The scuffed floorboards, the scattered clothes, the broken chain at Meera's throat. But the deeper they looked, the more the picture of a burglary gone wrong began to fray. There were no pry marks on the door. No sign of forced entry. Valuables, gold bangles, cash envelopes, even the brand new television, untouched. What was disturbed felt staged, like props on a set. When detectives asked Amar Dev to come in for a formal statement, he agreed, then failed to show. Instead, he checked himself into a small private hospital, complaining of chest pains and shock. While police waited outside, Amar slipped out the back door and vanished. Later that same afternoon, a withdrawal alert pinged on Meera's bank account. Someone had used her ATM card to take out large sums of cash. CCTV footage, grainy but clear enough, showed Amar at the counter. By the time officers raided his family home, Amar's room was empty. His phone switched off. A neighbor mentioned seeing him board a bus for Surat. From there, records show he took a night train heading south, to Bengaluru. In less than 72 hours after his wife's funeral, the grieving husband had turned into a man on the run. Meera's parents, Ramesh and Lakshmi Rao, refused to stay silent. They filed formal complaints, went to the press and pressed the authorities to escalate. The charges grew heavier. Murder under Section 302 of the IPC, cruelty under 498A, conspiracy, dowry harassment, breach of trust. Amar Dev's name was entered into police databases, border checks and lookout circulars. Posters with his photograph were quietly pinned up in police stations across Gujarat. But India is a vast country, and in 2004 the gaps between states were wide enough for a determined man to slip through. With forged documents easy to obtain, Amar simply melted into the crowd. Another face in the stations of Surat, another ticket stub on a crowded train to Bengaluru. From that moment, Amar Dev was no longer a husband, no longer a coach, no longer even Amar Dev. He was a fugitive, beginning a second life that would last nearly 15 years. After Mira's funeral, Amar vanished as though he had stepped into thin air. But he hadn't disappeared. He had simply become someone else. Using forged documents obtained from an old acquaintance, Amar Jinaraj shed his skin and became Praveen Badali, a mild-mannered, nondescript professional from nowhere in particular. The man accused of strangling his wife on Valentine's Day now worked at a mid-level position in a Bengaluru tech company, wearing crisp shirts, smiling at colleagues and blending into the city's chaos. He wasn't just hiding, he was building a new life. Under this new identity, he rented a flat in a bustling neighborhood, paid his bills on time, and played the part of a devoted husband again. This time to Nisha, a quiet schoolteacher who knew nothing about the man's past. Together they had 2 sons. Weekends at the park, parent-teacher meetings, birthday cakes, all while a murder charge hung over him like a ghost. Back in her hometown, Mira's parents refused to let their daughter's story be forgotten. Every year on the anniversary of her death they wrote letters. To the police, to ministers, to the media. They filed petitions, pleaded for action, even sent photographs of Mira to every major crime desk they could find. But months became years and years became more than a decade. Still no trace of Amar. In 2012, a faint glimmer of movement stirred in the cold case files. A newly formed investigative unit began combing through old evidence with new technology. Phone records, digital footprints, latent forensic leads. The team started to follow invisible threads. Bank accounts, old numbers, and the one constant Amar could not entirely sever: his mother, Anama. They traced sporadic calls to Amar's mother in a different state. Quiet, brief conversations, enough to keep suspicion alive. This was the first real break in almost 15 years. And with that, the hunt for Amar Jinaraj began anew. For years, Amar Jinaraj had been careful. He paid cash where possible, avoided drawing attention, and lived as Praveen Badali with almost obsessive discipline. But in the end, it wasn't advanced technology or elaborate sting operations that betrayed him. It was a simple phone call, a slip born of love, of habit, of longing. One ordinary afternoon he picked up his office landline and called his mother. The words were brief, the conversation fleeting, but the damage was irreversible. Investigators who had quietly flagged Anama's number traced the incoming call, not to a faraway town or a passing traveler, but to a Bengaluru office landline. Suddenly, after nearly 15 years of silence, the ghost had a pulse. The Varada police, working with Karnataka authorities, launched a quiet joint operation. They began surveillance, visiting the office where Praveen Badali worked, confirming his employee records, and finally, comparing the old photographs of Amar Jinaraj with the man now living under a borrowed name. There was no mistake. The fugitive husband who strangled his wife on Valentine's Day was hiding in plain sight. In 2018, after more than a decade and a half of running, Amar's world collapsed. Police moved in and arrested him at last. No more aliases, no more disguises. The man who had lived as a husband, a father, a professional, was suddenly just a fugitive in handcuffs. He was brought back to Varada. the very place he thought he had escaped forever. For Mira's grieving parents, the knock on the door carried news they had been waiting on for almost 15 years. Their daughter's alleged killer was finally back to face justice. When Amar, once Praveen Badali, stepped into the Virata Sessions Court, it wasn't only Mira's murder that shadowed him. His double life had left a trail of forgeries and falsehoods too tangled to ignore. Prosecutors built a case brick by brick. Not just the strangling of a young wife on Valentine's Day, but the theft of another man's name, the creation of false identity cards, passports, and educational certificates. Even Amar's former friend, the real Praveen Badali, came forward to file a criminal complaint. In court, he held up his original documents, pointing at Amar's forgeries, like a mirror cracked in two. The evidence mounted: bank withdrawals from Mira's account after her death, phone records tracing his calls to his mother while he was on the run, testimonies from his second wife, Nisha, and his employers in Bengaluru. Each piece is a thread tying Amar back to the life he thought he'd buried. Amar tried to maneuver within the system. He applied for bail, citing his aged mother, his need to collect Provident Fund dues, and his second family who would starve without him. But the prosecution stood firm. They argued he was a man who had already vanished once, who had faked documents and deceived two families. How could the court trust he wouldn't disappear again? The hearings stretched on. Each day peeled away another layer of his carefully built life. No longer a faceless fugitive, Amar Devraj Jinaraj, or whatever name he chose, was now just an accused man facing the full weight of Indian law. In mid-2023, after years of hearings, Amar Devraj, once the phantom Praveen Badali, managed to open a tiny crack in the system. The court granted him a brief interim bail of 15 days. Conditions were strict. He was to report his whereabouts, check in at the local police station, and return on the appointed date without fail. It was a sliver of freedom, and perhaps an irresistible temptation. For a moment, the city of Virata held its breath. Would he comply? Would the man who had already hidden for 15 years honor the court's order? Days passed. The check-ins became irregular. Then on the final day, the day he was to surrender, Amar simply didn't show up. Another absconding. Another warrant. This time a non-bailable one. Alerts went out to police departments across states. Checkposts and airports were quietly notified. But the man who had built a second life once seemed to melt into the country's vastness yet again. By late 2023 and into 2024, media reports still tracked every ripple of the case. The impersonation and forgery trial had already yielded a verdict. 7 years of rigorous imprisonment on paper. But without the accused in custody, the sentence sat like an empty judgment. And the murder charge, the very heart of the case, remained unresolved, a wound still open. Somewhere out there, Amar Devraj Jinaraj walks free again, a man with 2 names and a trail of broken lives. For Mira's family, justice remains a promise deferred. For the law, the chase continues. For nearly 2 decades, one man lived 2 lives. One under sunlight, another under shadow. He celebrated festivals, built a new family, collected paychecks under a stolen name, all while a murder charge waited like a ghost at his back. How does a man hold that secret so long? How does a system allow it? It was Mira's parents who refused to let the ghost vanish. Their petitions, their letters to ministers, their quiet anniversaries of grief. They were the heartbeat keeping this case alive when the rest of the world forgot. Yet their persistence also exposes something darker. How delay and bureaucracy can gift a fugitive the one thing he craves most: time. Evidence grows old. Witnesses fade or move away. And in a country where documents can be forged and identities bought, justice becomes a race against erosion. Will Amar Devraj Jinaraj ever be held fully accountable for Mira's murder? Or will his story be another cautionary tale of how the shadows can swallow truth whole? Tonight, you've walked with us through 20 years of a single crime. One Valentine's Day strangling that became a marathon of lies, escape, and unfinished justice. You've seen how a husband became a fugitive, how a second identity was forged, how a grieving family fought for answers, and how the legal battle still winds on with no verdict in sight. And Mira's story is not alone. Across India, countless cases remain unsolved or endlessly delayed, their victims' names slipping through the cracks. Each one is a reminder that justice can only be as strong as the will to pursue it. What do you think should happen next? Should the courts tighten bail conditions for serious crimes? Should the system change to catch fugitives faster? Let us know in the comments, we read them. If you want more stories like this, more investigations into the darkest corners of true crime, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Unraveling Crimes. Until next time, keep seeking the truth.